So at noon today, Donald J. Trump will raise his right hand and take the oath of office as the 45th President of the United States. The iconoclastic Mr. Trump has promised to shake Washington to its core. So the next 4 years will bring inevitable change to a thriving Massachusetts economy that really sometimes seems worlds away from the middle-class disaffection that led to his election. And indeed, as you know, Massachusetts wakes up this inauguration day really well-positioned to withstand the winds of change. Unemployment remains at an incredibly low rate of 2.8%, the lowest in 17 years. All of you, as employers, created more than 60,000 jobs last year. Economic growth output grew 27% faster than the nation as a whole. And Bloomberg News again ranked Massachusetts as the most innovative state in the country. And sure, we do face a persistent shortage of skilled labor. And yes, we face a dearth of housing that those workers can afford. And yes, business costs remain unacceptably high. But overall, we're the kind of state for which Red Sox general manager Dave Dombrowski would gleefully trade 4 minor leaguers in an effort to win the World Series this year. So the question we face this morning is whether the tidal wave of change promised by the Trump administration will help or harm employers here in Massachusetts. And no one really knows, of course, especially in a year in which conventional wisdom has been repeatedly turned on its head, and almost nothing the experts predicted has come to pass. So I plan to be particularly cautious about predictions this morning, since the panel of business leaders who will speak after me includes people who are global experts in matters of economic growth and job creation. But join me for a moment to look at 4 policy initiatives that may be coming down the road from Washington to Massachusetts. Number 1, healthcare reform. The Republican Congress and the new president appear ready to roll back major provisions of the Affordable Care Act and replace it with, well, no one seems to know yet. As all of you know, Massachusetts created its own successful healthcare reform 11 years ago. And it worked because everyone, from AIM to doctors and hospitals, to insurance companies and consumers, and elected officials from both parties, rolled up their sleeves and hammered out a plan that allowed 97% of Massachusetts residents to have health insurance, the highest figure in the nation and something we should all be very proud of. AIM and Governor Charlie Baker last week maintained in separate letters to Congress that the restructuring of federal health reform must be done thoughtfully and in a manner that causes no harm to a state like Massachusetts that has been committed to universal health care coverage since 2006. But right now, the future is murky, and one thing we know for sure is that repeal and replace does raise the prospect that billions of federal dollars that made the Massachusetts experiment so successful might be placed at risk. Number 2, infrastructure spending. President-elect Trump wants to offer $137 billion in federal tax credits to private investors to back transportation projects, a plan he says would unleash up to $1 trillion worth of infrastructure investment over 10 years. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has hinted that Democrats could join forces with the new president on an infrastructure initiative. Federal support would be a big plus for a Massachusetts transportation system where 5 million vehicles travel 150 million miles each day, and commuters take more than 1.3 million daily trips on an aging state public transit system. So I would mark that one as a plus. Number 3, trade. Candidate Trump campaigned on a strong anti-trade platform targeting China, Mexico, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and the proposed Trans-Pacific Trade Pact. Mr. Trump, as president-elect, has softened some of his rhetoric But really, Washington remains full of talk about 35% import tariffs and so-called border adjustments. Many of you know, trade is like oxygen to the Massachusetts economy. Bay State companies export more than $25 billion worth of goods and probably at least that much in services each year. Approximately 9,700 small and medium-sized Massachusetts companies support 112,000 jobs with export sales. And 7% of Massachusetts residents work for a foreign-owned employer. You know, as one expert noted, Trump is perhaps less anti-trade and more, quote, pro-good trade deals, unquote. We certainly hope so, because trade wars would cause broad collateral damage here in Massachusetts. And number 4, lower taxes. Mr. Trump has proposed to reduce the corporate income tax rate from 35% to 15% while eliminating deductions and simplifying the tax code. It's fair to say that such a change would benefit economic growth here in Massachusetts. At the same time, however, the proposed tax reduction poses obvious issues for a federal deficit that reached $590 billion, or 3.2% of gross domestic product in the most recent fiscal year. So these are just a few of the major proposals we may have to digest in this most unconventional year of 2017. But I would say the most perilous consequence of the Trump presidency may not come from the Trump administration at all. It may come from within Massachusetts itself, as well-meaning progressives take a conservative federal government as their cue to make the Commonwealth an example of big government, higher taxes, inefficient regulation, and fiscal instability. We've seen this dynamic at work before. Massachusetts has repeatedly gone its own way on issues such as mandatory paid sick leave, greenhouse gas emissions, minimum wage rates, and taxes, often in a manner that hamstrung the ability of employers here to compete. Indeed, the Boston Globe has already fired up the first warning shot from its editorial page, and I quote, "We'll take Trump's moves as they come and look for opportunities where states and cities can step up and defy any federal efforts to roll back progress," unquote. And the most recent session of the Massachusetts legislature also underscores the danger here at home. AIM, working with the House of Representatives and the Baker administration, was barely able to hold off scores of expensive social engineering bills last year, ranging from a ban on non-compete agreements to the creation of a state-run pension system for private sector workers. Advocates for these causes adopted newly aggressive tactics such as social media harassment and actual calls to boycott AIM member companies in an effort to muzzle the legitimate voice of employers. And we expect such demagoguery to continue as progressives who believe that if Washington won't, we will, seek to set Massachusetts apart on issues such as the $15 per hour minimum wage, paid family and medical leave, and a proposed 80% income tax surcharge that would gut small business here in the Commonwealth. So how does an established and successful employer association like AIM navigate this increasingly uncertain political environment, as well as the new breed of disenfranchised voters energized by President Trump? And how do employers who are otherwise busy creating jobs effectively convey their point of view as elected officials struggle to balance the needs of the economy with the overall needs of society? So allow me to make 2 suggestions. The first step is to articulate a positive agenda for economic growth. AIM has done that with our Blueprint for the Next Century, which we developed during our centennial in 2015, and now update on an annual basis. The blueprint makes 4 recommendations to create economic growth and opportunity for the people of Massachusetts. First, government and business must develop the best system in the world for educating and training workers with the skills to allow Massachusetts companies to succeed in the global economy. Second, Massachusetts must create a uniformly competitive economic structure including an efficient transportation infrastructure across all industries, geographic regions, and populations. Third, we must establish a world-class state regulatory system that meets the highest standards for efficiency, predictability, transparency, and responsiveness. And finally, Massachusetts must find a way to moderate the substantial burden that healthcare and energy costs place on business growth. AIM identified these issues based on conversations with thousands of employers from every sector of the Massachusetts economy. Yes, they are complex challenges, not well suited to an Instagram world, but nevertheless issues that represent critical impediments to employers ranging from small manufacturers to global biotechnology companies. The good news is that we have made some modest progress on these issues, and the not so good news is that we remain a long way from solving them. But be assured that AIM will continue to work during 2017 on solutions that will build a solid infrastructure for the growth of Massachusetts for many years to come. The second step involves increased involvement by employers with the political system. Our chairman, Dan Canary, calls this entrepreneurial populism. Those of you who risk everything to employ your neighbors in Boston, Worcester, Springfield, or the 348 other communities in Massachusetts must be willing to tell your stories to the representatives, senators, and members of Congress in whose districts you operate. The late Speaker Tip O'Neill's maxim that all politics is local has never been truer than it is today. And if all politics is local, the employer community represents a sleeping giant with enormous potential to drive sound public policy from the bottom up. You know, when an employer establishes a personal connection with its elected officials, those officials are able to understand the products the company makes, the processes it uses, the code it writes, the people it employs, the economic challenges it faces. And believe me, it really does affect their approach to public policy business issues. We have seen time and again the lasting impressions made when elected officials hear your compelling stories about jobs, innovation, grit, persistence, risk, and the opportunity for people to create a life for themselves and their families. Let me share with you one such compelling story, and that belongs to Vibram USA, a 100-year-old manufacturing company in West Brookfield that illustrates why innovation drives every sector of the economy. Led by President and CEO Mike Gianfrido, a member of the AIM Board of Directors, Vibram and its more than 300 employees have for decades made the soles for every shoe worn by members of the U.S. Armed Services. The company has, in the process, become a mainstay of the central Massachusetts economy. So here, through the courtesy of our media partners at WCVB Channel 5, is their story.
Perhaps you recognize the famous yellow octagon Vibram logo. It may even be on the bottom of a pair of shoes or boots you're wearing right now. But did you know its company's history has Italian roots stitched with proud New England know-how?
When we think about Vibram, we always think about performance, innovation, quality.
Mike Gianfrido is president and CEO of Vibram, the North Brookfield company first known as the Quabog Corporation when it started in 1916 as a local rubber manufacturer. In the mid-60s, the Italian shoemaker was looking to team up with a U.S. partner to produce a rugged and dependable sole. That's when Quabog stepped up to the challenge, and just last year, like a shoe's uppers and lowers, the two companies became one.
We are, I'll say, a performance niche brand.
For more than 50 years, the focus has been on producing rubber soles for work, industrial, and outdoor markets. But it's Vibram's bond with the U.S. military that is priority one. These Massachusetts workers supply the soles for every single American soldier, sailor, and airman's footwear.
We certainly take that very seriously.
Inside of there, everything's being mixed.
Chris Favreau says the company is also serious about innovation. Take, for example, their brand new Arctic Grip bottoms. Starting this fall, 6 different manufacturers will be offering shoes and boots with what Vibram calls the best ice gripping sole in the world.
Oh, that's remarkable. That's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
At a recent 100-year celebration, Vibram marked the century worth of commitment to the community. They believe its past, current, and future success is only made possible because of its workers, the hardworking souls who put pride in being made in mass in every soul.
That pride also extends to the recent Olympic Games in Rio as well. Vibram teamed up with Ralph Lauren to make the soles for both the men's and women's U.S. athletes' shoes that they wore for the opening ceremony.
What a great story. Congratulations to Mike and his great team at Vibram. And here's another great story. 100 miles to the east of Vibram, another company is prospering by exploring the still unknown boundaries between healthcare and information technology. IBM Watson Health, and yes, that's the Jeopardy Watson, seeks nothing less than to redefine the relationship between technology and humanity in a manner that improves the quality of medical care for all of us. IBM Watson Health could have located anywhere, but decided to establish its operations and hundreds of employees in Kendall Square, Cambridge, the epicenter of the global biosciences and software industries. The idea behind IBM Watson Health is to use cognitive computer systems that understand, reason, and learn to make sense of the estimated 80% of health data that is currently invisible to computer systems because it is unstructured. So let's take a look.
Massive amounts of health data will be generated about each of us over our lifetimes. And Watson has the power to sift through the data. 80% of the data out there in healthcare is unstructured data. So it is a time-consuming task for a physician to go through in order to prepare for a patient visit.
What Watson helps to do is to ingest all the data, to understand the data, to reason with the data, and to learn from the data continually. We have to be fast, we have to be nimble, we have to be flexible, and that's what IBM has allowed Watson Health to do.
There's not a lot of places, especially in a company that has been around for 100 years, where you get to talk with your managers, explain why you want to use a brand new technology, and then get it approved, and get to do that like every couple of weeks.
They have a lot of life science company all around us here in Kendall Square. There's MIT right down the street, and there's Harvard right one T-stop from here as well. So it is really the place that we want to be, and we are fortunate to be here, to have all the partner and clients come through.
This is where a lot of the investment money is flowing in today in healthcare. I've heard some statistics that there is more money flowing in 5 square miles of Kendall Square in healthcare than perhaps all of Silicon Valley.
I think one of the most exciting aspects of Watson Health is that it's like I'm working in a startup in one of the biggest companies in the world.
For the companies who are partnering with us, this is a unique opportunity to delve into the vast amount of data they have and come up with solutions that perhaps, with their own capabilities, they would have never imagined. And that's where Watson Health comes in. It's finding that needle in a haystack that a lot of these companies in the genomic space, in the imaging space, want to do.
It's important to have that experts from the industries right beside us to go through and try to cut costs and have hope in the healthcare industry.
Please join me in recognizing the team from IBM Watson Health, several of whom are here, including software engineer Alex Green, who was featured in this video. Where are you, IBM Watson Health? There you are. The success of diverse Massachusetts companies like Vibram and IBM Watson Health really underscores the vital need on this inauguration day for a divided nation to bind its wounds and rededicate itself to the shared values that have formed our social, political, and economic life for 240 years. We as employers call upon elected officials and all involved in public policy to set aside polemics and engage instead in civil debate on behalf of the large number of Americans who clearly feel restive, uneasy, and suspicious of institutions like government and business. Let us resolve to talk with each other and not at each other. Let us resolve to speak in full sentences, not 140-character missives that reduce to 2 dimensions the complex issues with which we must wrestle. Let us seek bipartisan consensus rather than intractable fiscal cliffs and government by inaction. Let us make hope and hard work our watchwords and not allow cynicism to leave undone the important work of business and government. Let us conduct ourselves, as Lincoln said after our terrible war, with malice toward none, with charity for all. So I will conclude by assuring you that employers are ready to do their part. You know, in an age when the only certainty is uncertainty, Associated Industries of Massachusetts and its 4,000 members stand ready to work with all levels of government, from the Baker administration to the Massachusetts legislature to the Congress, to ensure that the thriving economy, which all of you have created, is preserved for future generations and extended to every corner of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thank you very much for allowing me to share these thoughts with you.